Well, hello everybody. This is William Cunningham, but you can call me Reggie, my middle name, of My Hope in Marriage. You can visit us online at myhopeinmarriage.com. That's myhopeinmarriage.com. And what My Hope in Marriage is about is to provide resources, insights, and whatnot to help you to achieve a fulfilling and happy marriage, a fulfilling and successful marriage, and ultimately a happy life. I think it's important that you have a happy life. All right. Now, I want to talk about something today that I think is very important because it's you'll know right away. I call it the stumbling block in marriage, and stumbling blocks are things that cause the man or the woman to stumble and causing an incredible, disastrous event in the marriage. For example, infidelity. The man was caught cheating on his wife, and worse, by his wife. That's bad. Now, think about that. When that happens, you think to yourself, well, that's horrible. How could he cheat on his wife? How could he do that? How could he, go out there with another woman? Well, the act is not, I don't condone the act, but it may be understandable. All right, now what do I mean by that? I learned something very valuable, I think, with a company that I used to work for. And in that company, I learned, for example, let's say a nurse gives a patient the wrong medication. Well, is it the nurse's fault? Well, ultimately, she's responsible to make sure that he gets the proper medication. But you just can't look at her or him, the nurse. You just can't look at the nurse. You have to look at the process that led up to that. Why did she give him the wrong medication? Maybe for the past 10 years, she's gotten that same medication from that same place on the shelf. And this medication, the wrong one, looked just like it. The label may have looked similar. So she just immediately thought that it was the same medication that she's been grabbing from that same cabinet for the past, 5 years. All right. But just for this time, somebody just moved it. All right. So you have to look at the whole process, not just whose fault it is. Because if you just look at whose fault it is, then it could easily happen again. And the same thing in marriage. What happened such that someone would commit such an atrocious act of adultery or of infidelity? Let's go to a Bible. Let's go to the Bible. Okay. And we're going to go to 1 Corinthians chapter 7. And we're going to start at verse 3. Start at verse 3. 1 Corinthians 7:3, it says, a husband should fulfill his marital responsibility to his wife, and likewise a wife to her husband. A wife does not have the right over her own body, but her husband does. In the same way, a husband does not have the right over his own body, but his wife does. Do not deprive one another sexually, except when you agree for a time to devote yourselves to prayer. Then come together again. Otherwise, Satan may tempt you because of your lack of self-control. All right. Now let's move down to verse 8. Paul says, I say to the unmarried and the widows, it is good for them if they remain as I am. He's unmarried, of course. But if they do not have self-control, they should marry. For it is better to marry than to burn with desire. All right. So you see, we're going to come back to that self-control thing. He said, if you don't have self-control, if you're unmarried and you don't have self-control, in other words, you can't control your sexual impulses, you know, then get married because that's going to put a whole lot of stress on you, big time stress. All right. Therefore, and then he says, when you are married, you have to fulfill your responsibility to your spouse, and don't deprive one another sexually. Otherwise, you may fall for the temptation of Satan. All right? You may fall. Now, what happens is a stumbling block may be put in place. And that stumbling block may be caused by several things. And one of the things that's common in marriage is for the couple to neglect their relationship. They take their relationship and therefore each other for granted. They don't make sure that they fulfill their responsibility to each other, but they will make sure that they fulfill their responsibilities to others outside of the household. You're going to make sure you fulfill your responsibility to your job. You're going to make sure you fulfill your responsibility to your business or your career. You're going to make sure you fulfill the responsibility to your church if you're very active in your church. All right? You're going to make sure you fulfill your responsibility for the kids or what have you. But you're going to neglect your spouse. All right? And that causes a stumbling block. And let's go back to what Paul was saying. If you neglect to fulfill your sexual desires for one another, if you neglect to meet the sexual responsibilities in your marriage towards your spouse, then they're going to go not being sexually fulfilled. Now, when they got married, they didn't expect to have to have a wall of self-control for their own spouse. You don't expect that. You don't expect that you have to learn how to control yourself for your spouse. Of course, you're going to have some control, because you can't jump on her all the time, or she can't jump on you all the time, or you can't be holding hands all the time, or whatever. But you're going to make sure that you fulfill that responsibility, because if you don't, he may fall for the temptation. And what's the temptation? The temptation is valid because of the lack of self-control. And there's a lack of self-control, which was known because he got married. Because if you don't have the self-control, he says, if you lack the self-control, get married, man. But then you got married and you realize you're still in the same boat. You're married and you're still burning. So now what? What do you do now? Okay? So let me give you an example, okay? A wife who consistently rejects her husband sexually, builds a stumbling block in front of him wherever he goes, all right? And if it happens, of course, I'm talking about not a single incident. I'm talking about over a long time, months, years, decades, to the point where he doesn't expect fulfillment from his own wife. She doesn't expect fulfillment from her own husband. And therefore, that fulfillment, those antennas for that fulfillment may go out and end up landing on someone else. All right? He falls for the temptation because it's a stumbling block. All right? Where if his needs were being met at home by his wife, or her needs were being met at home by her husband, then you wouldn't have that problem. All right? He could easily say, I'm going to go home to my wife. He could easily say that. But he can't say that because you constantly reject him. You constantly reject him, and you put him in that situation where he has to fight off all those thoughts, all those desires. The Bible says hope deferred makes the heart sick. He's hoping to have a relationship with his wife. She's hoping to have a relationship with her husband. But instead, as time passes, that relationship dwindles. They grow further apart. They become more and more disconnected. And they just don't have that intimate emotional connection any longer. But that doesn't mean they don't want it. The man wants an emotional connection with his wife, and men get emotional connection with his wife through sex. The wife wants an emotional connection with her husband, but he's not getting it. She's not fulfilling his sexual needs. He's not fulfilling her emotional and sexual needs. And they just break apart. They fall apart until you become roommates. You see what I'm saying? You become roommates. You put a stumbling block in front of your spouse wherever you go when you don't meet their sexual needs at home, or when you don't meet their emotional needs at home. Do you understand what I'm saying? And that's because we tend to neglect our spouses. We tend to take them for granted. We tend to neglect nurturing our relationship. We'll spend time and nurture everything else. You'll study, go to school or what have you to get that promotion, to get that degree, to accomplish this project or that project, to take care of the kids and education and all that. You'll stay late and go to, recitals and sports events, but you'll neglect your husband. You'll neglect your wife. And over a period of time, like anything else, if it's neglected over a period of time, it degrades. It corrodes. All right? It breaks down. Think about if you just neglected your lawn for a couple of weeks. All right, think about it. If you neglect your lawns for a month, if you had neglected your hygiene for a month, if you neglect your job for a month, let's say you decide I'm not going to work for a couple of weeks. How long do you think you won't have a job? So why do you think you can neglect your spouse? Why does a woman think that she can neglect her husband for years and expect him to still be standing there when she wants him? All of a sudden, I don't know, hormones or something kick in and she wants that affection. But she's rejected him so much, he's done turned himself off. He done pulled away. Affection is the last thing that he's going to be expecting from her. So he's going to drop away because he has to protect himself. He has to build and learn self-control against his own wife. And likewise, the wife for the woman. I can speak more for the man because that's the perspective I know. But vice versa, you know what I'm saying? All right? So you can't neglect your marriage. You can't neglect your spouse. Now, what if he goes out after being rejected for decades, for 10, 20 years or more. And then all of a sudden, over a period of, let's say, 2-3 years, he done built this relationship inadvertently with another woman. It just began to grow and grow. And to the point, the affinity is so strong that he just can't break away because she makes him feel important. She makes him feel like a man. She makes him feel like she's someone he wants to protect and you know what I'm saying? But when he goes home, he doesn't get that. And likewise, the woman, she feels covered or whatever. All right, I'm speaking from the man's perspective, but it applies the other way around too. But if he does have sex with her, the other woman, then he's the bad guy. Then he's ridiculed, condemned, judged, sentenced to death. And you should break and leave him when you had already left him 20 years ago. And you put that stumbling block in front of him till after 20-something years or 10 years or whatever. He tripped. That doesn't count for all the times where he avoided it. Well, all the other times he was able to jump over that box, that stumbling block. All the times he was able to stay true to his commitment to a woman that just constantly rejects him, and vice versa. She remained true to her commitment to her husband. Even though their emotional connection was gone, she stayed true to her commitment. But this time she tripped. This time he tripped. And now he's the bad guy. He's a slum, a piece of dirt. When you threw him in the garbage years ago, left him out, left him in the burning hot desert, and he sees this body of water in the distance. Now that water is dirty. And if he had plenty of water, he wouldn't even think about drinking that water. All right? But now that he's so thirsty, he's so dried up inside, that water starts to look pretty good. Looks pretty refreshing now. You see what I'm saying? And out of desperation, out of a mental blackout or whatever, he takes a sip. Now you're the bad guy. She takes a sip. Now you're the bad guy. How dare you abandon or do your husband that way? How dare you do your wife that way? Cheating on them. Well, you left your husband a long time ago. You put that stumbling block in front of him. I would say it's your fault, but he just didn't have the self-control. And he should have. I can't say he should have, but you don't think you need self-control for your own spouse. That's the catch-22. That's the dilemma. What do? We'll have another video on that. So my point today is don't put those stumbling blocks in front of your spouse. It adds a lot of stress on their lives. The Bible says hope deferred makes the heart sick. It makes them sick inside. It makes them begin to resent you, resent the kids. They don't want to come home. He'll sit in the car for a while before he comes into the house from work, or she might do that or whatever. Don't do it. Make sure you nurture a relationship. Have regular date nights. Have regular time. Don't dump your spouse on your kids. Make sure you prioritize your relationship and maintain that emotional connection and make it stronger and stronger each year instead of weaker and weaker each year until you're way apart with stumbling blocks in front of you. Just that one day, inevitably, or maybe not, probably inevitably, you trip. And now you're the bad guy. No, you set him up to fail. You set her up to fail. So check out your marriage. Check out yourself. And do what Paul said. Don't deprive one another. All right? I hope you got it. All right? Again, this is William Cunningham. You can call me Reggie, my middle name, of myhopeandmarriage.com. You can visit us online at My Hope and Marriage. Get the articles and the lessons and whatnot, resources to help you establish and maintain a happy, fulfilling marriage. All right? Well, until the next time, you know what to do. Be blessed and prioritize your marriage.